Hey everyone, Ultra Healthy Video Game Nerd back. The fun never stops. It's good to see you again. For this episode, I'm not going to be talking about video games all that much. I actually thought that I would tell you a little bit about what it's like living in Japan. I've been living in Japan for well over 10 years now. Actually, people who watched my last video about Psycho Dream and the artist behind it, Nishizaki Marino, can probably figure out how long I've been in Japan. I actually said the year that I came here. But it's been a lot more than 10 years. And I thought some people might enjoy hearing about what it's like being here for this long. Hopefully, most of you realize that it's nothing like what life is depicted in anime. Hopefully, most people are rational enough to understand that that has nothing to do with real life. You're not surrounded by cute little girls in a room somewhere having sexual experiences day in and day out. But it is really great. Japan is not heaven. It is not paradise on earth. It's not perfect. There's a lot of things I do have problems with, but it's a really great place to be, and I really do love it here, and I plan on staying here possibly forever. So today I wanted to get into some of the things that you might keep in mind if you have any plans on trying to move or work in Japan. First of all, since this is primarily a gaming channel, thought I'd just talk about this first. A lot of people have the idea in mind that if they could come game shopping in Japan, that they're gonna find all these hidden miracle deals in, little side street stores. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to burst your bubble and break your heart. It's just not like that anymore. Everybody has realized by now what these games are worth. Basically, stores have to price things, of course, slightly over market value. Market value means if you put up something on an auction and it's just started at $1, what would it sell for? So the store's prices are definitely going to be a little bit above that. Unfortunately, a lot of them are way above that, like twice that. So it's unfortunate. It's really sad because I used to really love, 2 or 3 times a year, doing a really big game shopping trip. It was one of the things that I looked forward to the most in my life. And it's unfortunate. The stores are so expensive now for games. It's not really all that fun. I have to buy almost everything on auctions now. But they are out there. At the very least, if you go to the store, you can, see up front the quality, the condition of the game that you're looking for. And they do have a lot of the things. They don't have everything necessarily when you go every time. It depends. But I'm really sorry. 10 years ago, maybe. Yes, it's true. There were some miracle deals. I passed up on a copy of Sylphia for like $75 or $100 or something. It's awful. But it's unfortunate. But if you live in Japan and you have a Japanese address, then you have the option of using Yahoo Auctions Japan. And that's sort of the current holy grail, basically. Most people selling things on Yahoo Auctions won't ship abroad. They will only ship within Japan. And the prices there are essentially the cheapest you're going to find. So if you do manage to come and live here and you have a Japanese shipping address, then you can use Yahoo Auctions and get things the cheapest. They're not necessarily inexpensive, but it's the best way to go. Alright, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's take a look at what it's actually like living in Japan. First of all, I think the number one thing that's going to dictate what your life in Japan is like is whether you live in a big city or in a rural area. So Japan basically only has really 4 or 5 or so, or maybe a couple more, really, central urban areas where things are really developed. Everywhere else in the country is mid-range to just total middle of nowhere. The majority of the country is, farming areas, rice fields, really small kind of, residential areas. Most of it does not look like this big metropolis that gets depicted in anime and movies sometimes. Yeah, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, and a couple other places are really modernized and have that very kind of technologically advanced look. The rest of the place is a little mundane. actually, to be completely honest. It's just, kind of day-to-day life. You go to work and, come back and hopefully get to spend some time with your friends and, do whatever it is that you like to do. But there's a really big difference. And living in those metropolitan areas is extraordinarily expensive. If you want to live in central Tokyo, I mean, you're talking San Francisco prices. A tiny little one-bedroom apartment is going to cost you more than $1,000 a month. So what happens if you're working in Tokyo, most people live on the outskirts, kind of, and you have to travel by train into central Tokyo for your job every day, half hour, 45 minutes. And these things are just packed, where you're standing like this up against people, and you smell old salaryman's, musty armpits. And, I personally just would not want to live that way. I live in a city of about 600,000 or 700,000 people. Now that's probably sounds huge, but the area is massive. It's like all spread out. It's actually not a particularly really metropolitan place. But it is really nice, it's really calm, and things are affordable here. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment for $600 a month with parking. So it's one really important thing to consider. If you have any ideas of moving to Japan and trying to find a job here, do you want to live, in a place that's just, buildings just squished together and all concrete, or are you willing to live in a place that's, a little more down to earth, maybe not so exciting, but you can actually, save money and, have your own space. The next thing you're going to want to think about if you're living in Japan is, are you going to own a car or not? And this is connected to whether you live in a big city or a smaller city or a more rural area. I actually lived in Japan and managed to make it for 9 years without a car. I lived in the center of cities that were not like really huge, but since I lived in a central location, I was able to make it just fine. I could ride my bicycle. There's some public transport. It was fine. But really, if you live, outside of the city centers, you're going to want to have a car. And even if you do live, in a major area, you might want to have a car anyways. As time passes, you're going to get tired of riding your bicycle around to every single place all the time, especially if your job is, more than 3 or 4 kilometers away. I actually finally did get a car because I was living in a place where most of the places where I worked basically were like up mountains. There was it was a city with a lot of hills and bridges that go over rivers. So I was constantly riding my bike up and down stuff, and I just got tired. So I did finally get a car. Owning a car in Japan is not like owning a car in America. People in other countries may understand this a little bit better, but I'm American, so it was really jarring for me at first. In Japan, you don't just buy a car once and then you have it. You're just constantly paying for it. I mean, the price of upkeep is ridiculous. I own a car that's maybe just a little too good for me, really. I kind of overshot it. It was a foolish thing to do. The registration for the car 1 year costs $450 just to own it. It's a luxury tax. It's ridiculous. And here also, every 2 years, every other year, you need to have a big major checkup on the car, which is kind of government mandated. And, if you have a newer car and nothing's really wrong with it, might not be too bad, $500 or $600. But as time passes, it costs more and more as you need to, fix things. They have a really high standard. It's going to start to go for at least $1,000 more, every couple years. So that's a big cost. And of course, you do have to get car insurance here. It's kind of optional, but I think you should. So it's just a lot of money. And also in Japan, there's no free parking, basically. You can't just drive to your friend's house and just park on the curb the way you do in America. All parking here is completely regulated. You can't just park your car on any old street. It's just not the way it works. Most apartments will provide parking spaces, especially here. I'm not just smack in the middle of Tokyo. But when you buy a car here, you need to actually go down to the police department and apply for proof of parking, and they come and survey your parking spot and make sure that you have a place to park it. You have to submit this form before you can buy a car, because you can't just park your car wherever you want. It was quite different for me. And if you live in, a big place, if you live in Tokyo or Osaka, parking is super expensive. If you just want to rent a parking spot just alone, we're talking $200-300 a month. Yes. No, I'm not kidding. Having a car here is a big responsibility. It's a lot of money. Next up, looking for housing. I just said that I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, I want you to understand that that is extremely rare in Japan for a single person to be living in an apartment with a living room and 2 separate bedrooms. Doesn't happen very much. The fact is, a lot of people here, single people, live in very small apartments. 1 bedroom, kitchenette. I don't like it. I can't really live like that. I'm American. I'm used to having, plenty of space, my own space. But when you start to search around, if you are able to look for your apartment on your own, you'll start to discover that the price between these really small apartments and more reasonably sized apartments isn't very big. It's like $150 a month difference. And I think that's actually because a lot of people here prefer to live in small spaces. They find it convenient. It's easy to clean. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of belongings to begin with. And they're maybe not at home all that much. If you have a job here, you're going to be at your job a lot. We're going to talk about that a bit later. But if you want a bigger apartment, and you have the Japanese ability to go and search for it on your own, you can find it actually. They're out there. A lot of people, if you move here, your job might be the one that's going to find an apartment for you. They're either going to search for something for you, or they might have something rented out that they just stick their employees in a kind of rotation. And those are hit or miss. You're kind of left with the luck of the draw. I really love the apartment that I live in. One of the issues that I had was I have a cat. And finding apartments in Japan that allow pets is very, very hard. So I was really limited. I had like 2 or 3 options, and really I only had 1, basically. And this apartment is really nice, and I'm really happy being here. But if you have a pet, if you have a dog or a cat, you're gonna have to fight to get a nice apartment. Also, you have to put a deposit when you rent an apartment here most of the time. There are places that will say no deposit, no gratuity. They're questionable. Maybe if you strike a miracle, you can get a nice one. Most of those places are very questionable. They might be run down. Most places here are going to expect you to put down a deposit of maybe 2 months. If you have a pet, in my case, it's at least 2, probably 3. And there's something called a gratuity. We call it reikin in Japanese. It's just a thank you that you pay to the landlord. You have to give them a month's rent just because when you move into your apartment. A lot of places do this. Apparently it was this way for a very long time. Some people are getting out of it. There are real estate offices that do advertise, no gratuity can happen. But when you rent an apartment here, to begin with, you're going to need 2 or 3 G's down. That's a little glimpse into what it's like living in Japan, actually having a place to live here. So what about food? Well, there's a McDonald's in every town. That's all you need to know. No, I haven't eaten McDonald's in years. Going to the grocery store here is a hugely different experience for me from going to a grocery store in America, because in America, when you go into the grocery store, you walk in and the junk food section is directly in front of you. I mean, probably a third of the grocery store in America is like candy and snacks. And it's not like that here, actually, in Japan. We have junk food, obviously, but it's mostly Japanese ingredients. When you go to a Japanese grocery store, obviously. A lot of fish products, a lot of dried stuff. Obviously, they do sell a lot of fresh fish. They do have regular fresh meats also. Fresh meat can be much more expensive in Japan than it is in other places. At most grocery stores, beef here is just prohibitively expensive. It's ridiculous. Unless you have the discount grocery store nearby that sells Australian beef. Yes, I always eat Australian beef. It's great. It's perfectly safe. Tastes wonderful. And it's affordable. Thank God. But chicken and pork are quite similarly priced. There, you can have them. It's no big deal. One thing you will definitely notice when you go to the grocery store here, fruit can be damn expensive. Everything other than apples, oranges, and bananas is like, you'll be shocked. You know, it can easily be more than $10 for one cantaloupe. I mean it. 15. And anything else is just like, I guess they're exotic. Grapes. It's a joke. It's like, what? I don't know, 12, $15 for, a little, thing of grapes like this. But you will probably want to learn to work with some Japanese ingredients if you live in Japan. There's a lot of great restaurants here. Obviously, the sushi boat restaurants are excellent. A lot of them are just $1 a plate. They're wonderful. If you search around, there's some really great ramen. I hear that ramen is popular in America recently. Is that true? I'm not really sure. It's always been a big thing here. And there are actually a number of, ethnic restaurants, food from other countries. A shockingly large number of Indian restaurants in Japan, almost wherever you go. Some of it is good. Some of it is a bit expensive. In my town, we actually have a place run by a Bangladeshi guy, and it's excellent. It's extraordinarily good food. So they are out there, but you're going to be left with Japanese cuisine most of the time. A lot of Japanese cooking involves soy sauce, mirin, which is rice alcohol, and sugar. Those are just like the go-to ingredients. So many things are just made with that. Sukiyaki, teriyaki is just made with that stuff. It can get a little repetitive. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there. Since we live in the age of the internet now, and there's all kinds of recipe websites out there, there's a lot of really good stuff to be found. You can really get creative with a lot of the ingredients they have in Japan. I'll probably eventually going to do a kind of cooking episode, show you the kind of things that I make. A lot of good food here. Japanese cuisine it's kind of dainty. You know what I'm saying? They give a lot of focus to the way it looks, to the presentation. And the flavor is, I don't know. It just is what it is. Vinegar, soy sauce, rice alcohol, sugar. There you go. So now I'm going to reveal one of the stark realities about living in Japan and supporting yourself in Japan work life. If you're an English speaker and you want to come to Japan and find a job, the fact of the matter is most people are going to be teaching English. It's just the way it is. That's where the jobs are. And there are a number of ways to go about this. There are English conversation schools. These are private companies. Oftentimes very small companies, might just be sort of like a mom and pop shop, even with one store. There are chains also, and a lot of people are going to be ALTs, assistant language teachers, and nowadays that generally means you're going to go get hired by a dispatch company, and they are going to place you in a public school that they have a contract with. This is the dominant way of English teaching in Japan at the moment. There is also something called the JET program people may know about. This is a government-funded program where they fly people over and they place you in some board of education. You will work directly under the board of education with the JET program. It does pay a lot better, but there's a term limit. You can only do it for 5 years. And I actually came here on the JET program and did it for 5 years and then kind of moved on. But I want to talk about working for these other places. So if you're an ALT, anything can happen. It all depends. You might work for a junior high school and you have a very easy job. You don't have a whole lot of work to do. You might end up working at a few junior high schools, one on a different day. You might end up working at 10 or 15 different elementary schools and have a pretty packed schedule. At elementary school, generally, right now, elementary school teachers, are not certified English teachers. So when a native English speaker goes there to teach, basically, we do everything. As for junior high school, English is a standalone subject, and they have certified English teachers. That's all they teach is just English. So you'll be working together with them. And it's a pretty good situation. It can be. It's not horrible. The pay is not extraordinary. A lot of times you'll get paid less in the school holiday times, during summer vacation and winter vacation. They'll pay you less because you're not going to work. And it's sneaky. Basically, these dispatch companies, they're like the Walmart or the McDonald's of their industry. They just have, a majority grasp on things, and so they're just dominant, so they can set the prices, and it's pretty low. And the fact of the matter is, the market is flooded in Japan. There's a lot of people who want to be here and work here. It is a great place to be, and there's probably less jobs than there are people, so the salary just gets driven down. And the salary has gotten driven down so far that now, despite the fact that there are, so few jobs compared to how many people want them, it's just the prices are so bad that not a whole lot of people are willing to take them. It's a very strange situation. But basically, that's what it's like if you're going to be an ALT working in the public schools. It's not bad. Most times things are pretty cool. Then there is working for the private English conversation schools. Now, again, they're hit or miss in a different way. You will generally be pretty busy if you work in an English conversation school. You're probably going to be actually teaching at least 4 hours a day of actual teaching. You'll have to be at work, obviously, 8 or 9 hours or whatever it is, but you're going to be teaching probably at least 4 or 5 hours every single day. And a lot of them are for small children. A lot of them are for, preschool age children or kindergarten. And that requires a certain type of personality, a certain person, who can deal with that environment, who's good at that job. It's not just for everybody. And the pay, again, the market is saturated, so the pay is not necessarily all that great. It's not necessarily a business that makes a whole lot of money to begin with. But it depends. There are places that definitely treat you fairly, that will give you bonuses and raises, and might even give you, some real nice paid time off. It all depends. There's a lot of horror stories by people who came to Japan getting hired by an English conversation school, not knowing anything about, what could possibly happen, and ending up getting in the worst possible situation. So you want to be careful about that. I really, truly recommend, if you honestly are thinking about living in Japan, if you want to work here, get a teaching license in your home country. Seriously, do it. Or if you're a specialized professional, if you have some kind of really set skill that doesn't have to do with just English or language teaching, there are jobs here. You have to look around, but they're out there. But if you're gonna just come here and you're thinking you're gonna teach English, really super recommend that you get a teaching credential in your home country first. It's going to make your life so much better. You can work at international schools, you can get paid properly, you have a much better life. So take it from me. Some people may want to know if they're going to need to speak Japanese in order to live in Japan. Fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people here who don't speak Japanese who live and work in Japan. Some people who've been here for quite a while. If you get hired to a job here, generally you're going to be teaching English, and that company understands that you're not going to speak Japanese very well. So they're actually usually are going to have, some person who works for them specifically just to handle all the day-to-day stuff for their employees who don't speak Japanese. Getting a visa to begin with, renting an apartment, finding a car, paying your bills, all this stuff. Not a whole lot of people here speak fluent English. It's not extremely common. A few times when I go to the big cities, I remember when I was traveling and I was kind of like looking at a guidebook or looking at a map, and I had once or twice had a person come up to me and speak English and say, "Oh, can I help you with something?" That was really cool. But it's not particularly common to find people who speak really fluent English. You will want to study Japanese hard. It's not going to happen overnight. It can be done like anything else. It's a very rewarding thing to study. The grammar is not as hard as a lot of people make it out to be. I personally think the grammar is a lot more straightforward than English. The problem is, if you study Japanese, you're going to have to learn the kanji set at some point. Kanji are the characters that, called the Chinese characters they've taken from China. Japan has a standard set of 2,000. And if you've never seen them, it just looks like scribbles. It just looks like pictures. But there is a system. And, it's going to take you, at least 5 years to really get a good grasp on it. Can be done. Totally worth your time. And you're going to be at a big advantage because you're going to be the one who speaks and reads Japanese very well. And this is super connected to this channel. I say this a lot of time in comments and elsewhere. If you can read Japanese, things that people are paying hundreds of dollars for to get the English versions of video games, you can get the Japanese versions of for a tiny fraction of the price. I just realized recently how expensive 16-bit role-playing games are, the North American versions, because there's so many more people who want them. Chrono Trigger in Japan for a perfectly nice boxed copy will cost you a whopping $5 or $6. A Valkyrie Profile will probably cost you in the range of 99 cents. It is the bottom of the bargain bin game in Japan. I had no idea how those things got so expensive in Japan, but it's because not nearly as many people can speak and read Japanese compared to the number of copies that are available. So if you're a gamer, hopefully you're a gamer if you're watching this channel, it's super worth your time to learn Japanese. It's going to make your life here a lot easier. Almost all aspects of daily life are in Japanese. I can't imagine living here for a long time without becoming pretty fluent in it. So those are some of my impressions of living in Japan. Some other people may feel differently, but some of it might be helpful for people who are considering moving here. And next, since we did talk about apartments for a while, I thought I would give you a little tour of my apartment. Do keep in mind that it is much bigger than the apartments a lot of single people in Japan live in, but that being said, there's some cool video game stuff around here and there. So I'm going to go behind the camera and we're going to take a look. Alright, here we are. I thought I would start with something that's familiar to everybody. This is the wall in the area where I make all the legendary Ultra Healthy Video Game Nerd shows, and this is actually secretly where most of the cat stuff is. I've also got my CD racks over here, so my music. The white and black rack, this is where all the video game soundtracks are. I'm not going to introduce those in detail today, but someday I probably will. And other music, I've got a lot of old heavy metal, Black Sabbath, Pagan Altar, Witchfind, all that good stuff. And these binders are actually video game soundtracks that I make on my own when I record them from the games. Moving on, this is actually part of the living room. So I've got my video game set up right here. As you can see, the systems: Dreamcast, GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and then down underneath, it's a little hard to see, Sega Saturn, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, a Nintendo, both the American and Japanese, Sega Mega Drive, and there's a Master System in there as well. There's also an arcade controller for the Dreamcast, get to use that sometimes. And very, very important, of course, I do have the PC Engine. The controller for that is shorter, so I keep it close to the couch. And this beautiful little cabinet right here is actually where all of my video game collection is in. Again, I'm not going to get into detail of the collection, but this does store at least 400 games. And also, people who are following me on Instagram or Twitter may remember this. I just put up all those postcards from Final Zone into a frame and got that on the wall. This other thing right here, this is actually a painting done by a friend of mine here, Jean-Jacques. He's a professional artist. I do love this. I bought this off of him. It's pretty trippy. The dining room, if you will. So this is the kitchen. In America, you would probably call it a kitchenette. You know what I'm saying? It's really just enough space for one, maybe two people to stand around and cook. It is a little messy because I be cooking up a storm. Just cooked some sexy lasagna the other night. And of course I've got tons of spices because I'm that cooking man, the ultra healthy video game nerd. This is one thing that might interest some people. This is a microwave oven, but in Japan we don't have standard ovens that you kind of pull out like you see in America. So what they've done to rectify this is most microwaves now also have regular convection oven functions also, and this does too. I can cook almost anything in this. Cooked a whole chicken in this thing for Christmas. Came out really nice. It's a beautiful machine. So the wonders of modern technology. All right, going into the bedroom. Cat toys all over the goddamn place. Hey, speaking of cats, there's a living jackass right there on the bed. Yeah, you know, very simple. Got the computer desk all set up. It's relaxing. Okay, I'm talking, yelling, and screaming. This is, I guess you could call this an altar of sorts. It's just got some things on it that are important to me. Gumby, loved that as a kid. Do have the troublemakers or the mischief makers thing back there. I'm kind of not decided yet what I'm going to do with that. Probably going to put it on the wall at some point. These kind of clay figures are actually things that my older sister makes. She gave these ones to me for my birthday, and this kind of bigger panorama one was something she had made just for fun and eventually gave me. Another painting I had by Jean-Jacques is just a fun little caricature. Now, let's go into the workout room. Ooh, sexy. Keep in mind, very few people in Japan are going to have the space for something like this. But I did get a full home gym. When I moved here, I tried going to the local gym and I was really unhappy with the kind of system that they had and the facilities that they had. So I did end up buying my own. It was about $1,100. This is a medium range quality one. It's really quite nice. You can do almost anything. Came, you know, with all of the weights and whatnot. It's great. So basically I only come in here when I'm working out for the most part. And then let's take a little look over here. You can see these are comics and books that I have. I keep all the Nishizaki Marino stuff in here. Introduced that in the last video. The Bobobo books, that's very biblical to me. Those are extremely important. Those, I learned a lot of Japanese with those. Probably not good Japanese. Really weird books by this guy named Sagano Hilmer. This series was called Black Brain. And I mean, the guy is a little probably sick in the head, but somehow or other he brought these comics into fruition. That's that. Oh yeah, there's one thing that makes me look like a goddamn weeaboo in this house. Keep that over the bed, just for inspiration. Alright guys, so now you've basically seen everything. That's my place. Just figured I'd finish off showing off a little painting that my brother did. It's kind of supposed to be a geisha. I always keep this thing up in my house. I really like it. So as always, thanks a lot for watching to the end, guys. I do really appreciate it. It's been fun. And I will see you in the next video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please subscribe. Check me out on other social media. Lots of fun stuff to see there. See you again.